there, today I bring you my July wrap up. Now it has been a really strangely long month for me and I cannot remember reading a lot of these books, so I might be looking down at my notes. Sorry, I just looking back at the pile, I honestly couldn't tell you. So I started the month with Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. This was a 3-star for me. In terms of literary merit, I can see absolutely why this is studied and revered, etc, etc, but in terms of a story to just read, it wasn't the best, purely because of the style. So the style of this is that it is set in a 24-hour period. It is stream of consciousness, so we sort of will be walking down the street with one character who will then think something that will lead to the thoughts of another character, or walk past somebody and will then hop to that character. And it's, in a literary way, it's really intelligent and really clever and a really interesting look at how we tell stories. But in terms of the development, because this is done in a 24-hour period and we flip between quite a lot of people, so we never really stick with or get to know one character. Because of that, it just felt a bit detached and the story wasn't quite... Not that I mind overly about plot, but there was just nothing, there was no substance to it, which in a way I think is kind of the point, because our main character, Mrs. Dalloway, is kind of meant to be a sort of unsubstantial, fickle, just typical woman who's all concerned with her looks and her parties. And that did come across, and as I say, there are so many techniques in here and so many clever points that the reason I probably didn't like it is the very point of it, I expect. But I think it would be one that would be great to study, and I can see why people study it. But as I say, for me, reading it just for an enjoyment read, it didn't really float my boat. Then I read The Improbability of Love by Hannah Rothschild. Again, I didn't like this. It wasn't a great start to the month. This was a 2-star read for me. I will leave a picture of it somewhere around. It was on my Kindle. I got this from NetGalley, so I don't have a copy. But I really didn't enjoy this. This was shortlisted for the Bailey's Fiction Prize. I won't say too much about it because I did do an individual review, which I will link down below, which is kind of a rant, really, in the end. This was really weak, really poor. I felt like it didn't know what it was, and generally was one of the worst things I've read in a very long time, so I won't go into it this time. Then I read Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell, and I didn't like this one either. It was a really bad start to the month. My reason for not liking this is probably a lot to do with me. A lot of stuff happened and I ended up moving house in the middle of reading this, so I didn't pick up for about 3 days and I completely just got out of the swing of it. But generally, I just feel like, again, with the same with Mrs. Dalloway with this one, that it just kind of, it was more concerned with the style and the way it was told than the actual telling. So this is a story that basically is split into 7 different parts, and we start at the very far distant past, on a ship, and then we move forward into present day and then on into the future, and basically the stories are told, one half is told going this way, so we have one half of number 1, one half of number 2, one half of number 3, all up until 7 when we get the whole story in the middle, and then we go and work our way back outwards until the very last half story is the story that we started with. For me, I felt like the links between the stories, and it might have just been me completely missing things, but for me, the links between the stories were too tenuous. Like, in order for that to work, I think there would have had to be quite direct links between the stories, and the only link that I personally could find was that all of the stories were sort of concerned with people who had broken the rules to change things or to follow a path that they believed was right. But other than that, I don't think there was really anything linking the stories, not substantial, not that I could pick out. As I say, I might well have missed things, because there's massive chunks of this that I didn't pay any attention for. But I just, yeah, and sometimes there might be like, somebody would be reading a book or watching a film that's been appearing in a previous story, but again, it was kind of just like little winks towards the other stories. It wasn't an overarching plot that joined them all together, which I feel like in order for this book to have worked would have needed to be there. For me, this was basically just a mediocre collection of short stories that were told in quite a bizarre way, and I'm sorry, did not like. I have read The Bone Clocks by David Mitchell as well. I would definitely recommend that one more, because it's more of a joined together story, and this was just not really. I am going to watch the film though. I'm interested to see if I get something different out of the film, if I can see more of a connection. And I then did the Booktubeathon, which kind of improved my bad reading, because I had some amazing reads during that week. In fact, I don't think there was any that I was not pretty much blown away by. Oh, there was one that I didn't like. Take it back, but all the others were like 4 or 5-star reads, most of them 5-star in fact. I'm not going to go too much into these because I have done my readathon wrap up, which I will link down below, where I reviewed all of these, so I'm probably just going to tell you a slight bit about it and my star rating. So I started the readathon with Ali Smith's Artful. This was a 4-star for me. Really unique, really strange kind of amalgamation of non-fiction and fiction, and it was Ali Smith, so it had to be 4 stars at least. Then I read Miranda July's Nobody Belongs Here More Than You. 5 stars, loved it. This is a library copy. I have since bought a copy for myself because I loved it that much. I couldn't bear to part with it. It's absolutely amazing. If you haven't read Miranda July, you should. Then I read Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. I believe I gave this 4 stars. I might be wrong. Really impressive. Actually, the best Harry Potter I've read to date. And I am impressed, and this is going to spur me into reading the others one a month, so gotta be a good thing. Then I read The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I don't think I need to say more about this other than to say that it was a 5-star read. Then I read Farewell Summer by Ray Bradbury. Again, a 5-star read. Loved it. And I finished with The Scrapbook by Carly Holmes. When I say finished, this was my After Dark read, so I was kind of reading it throughout. And didn't like this one. I think I gave it 2 stars. It was just not for me at all. So I also, in the readathon, started to read Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. I got about a quarter of the way through with the readathon and finished this afterwards. This was amazing. I was a bit worried. A lot of the time I'm quite sceptical about going into books that a lot of people love, because I think I'm kind of prone to be the rebel and be like, well, I didn't like it. But I did love this. I'm going to read all Daphne du Maurier now. She is so good. This actually reminded me a lot of The Crimson Petal and the White in a lot of ways, which is bizarre because they're completely different books. Anyway, this is kind of, if you like Jane Eyre, you'll probably really enjoy this. This is about a woman who, we never know her name, and she meets a man called Maxwell de Winter when she is a lady's maid for a woman in Monte Carlo. And while her lady is in bed ill, she sort of goes off gallivanting with Mr. de Winter and ends up marrying him and moving to his massive great house in Cornwall called Manderley. But he has a dead wife called Rebecca, and our narrator kind of becomes obsessed with this image of Rebecca and obsessed with the idea that she can never replace Rebecca. She becomes obsessed with how Rebecca died, and it all turns into a bit of a mystery, and it's a page turner, I tell you. So for me, what I loved about this was that not only is it very much about how Mr. de Winter has effectively, Rebecca has died under his marriage, and now the narrator is kind of shrinking under his marriage and coming into question everything that she is, and sort of, for some reason, I mean, he's a nice enough guy, but his imposing presence is kind of squashing the women around him. But also, this was, for me, I don't know if anyone else got this, but this was kind of about the way women are unkind to each other and themselves, because, ultimately, the main thing that was squashing our narrator was the imposing, massive presence of Rebecca. Also, there is a maid there who is really unkind to her, because she loved Rebecca and she doesn't see that there's a space for another Mrs. de Winter, and I thought that was a fantastic touch. But it was very much for me about the pressure that women put on themselves as well to live up to this image of a perfect woman that has come before them. And I think every woman has that thing where they're sort of worried about whether their partner's exes were like larger than life and better than them, and they can never beat that. There were so many interesting feminist things in here. I could go on for ages, but it was 5 stars, one of my favourite books of the year, probably one of my favourite books of all time. I loved it, and I would definitely recommend it to anyone who hasn't picked it up, because it is as good as the hype. I then finished an audiobook which I've been listening to for about 2 months now, which was Gold by Chris Cleave. I will leave a picture somewhere around here. This was a complete impulse for me, and I don't normally buy things on impulse, but I had a credit on Audible, and there was a buy one get one free sale, and Chris Cleves Gold was in there, and there was none others that I was that taken with, and the blurb for this was one of those things that says, we don't need to tell you about this book, you just need to read it. So I was like, okay. I think if I picked this up in physical form, I would have been really bored of it and been like, that was a bit of a waste of time. But because I was listening to it on audiobook and I was just listening to it in between places and when I was going for walks and things, I actually really enjoyed it. So I gave it 3 stars. It wasn't a phenomenal thing by any means, but it was good fun. Basically, it follows 3 people, Zoe, Kate and Jack, who are all cycling athletes, and they basically start off at the Olympics before 2012, I don't know, I can't remember what the year was, when Zoe is competing and we find out that Kate is at home with a child. We then sort of follow their careers, and Kate and Jack are a couple, they are married and their child Sophie has cancer, and we sort of follow their struggles and the way they fit that into their Olympics. We also follow Zoe, who's sort of always competing with Kate in a way, and we sort of follow that friendship. And it's basically about how 3 people who are all ultimately competing against each other can sort of have this weird tentative friendship, because they're all friends. They all started at Olympic camp or whatever it is when they were kids, and it's really, as I say, it was mediocre. I wouldn't have gone crazy for it if I was reading it, but because I was listening to it, I did find it good fun. The only thing I would say with the audio book is that a lot of the time it was flitting between sort of the past, so when they were kids and when they were all in this Olympic camp together and getting to know each other, and the future, and there was no explanation that that was happening. There was no date that told you that you were back to the past, so a lot of the time I was kind of trying to guess, is this happening now or in the past? But it wasn't enough to really confuse me. It's the first proper fiction I've listened to on audiobook, and I wasn't lost at all. I wasn't confused, so that's got to be a good thing. So yeah, there was that one. And then I finished the month with Carol by Patricia Highsmith, which took me back to a bad point, to be honest. It was kind of difficult because I finished this after finishing all my amazing reads from the Booktubeathon. So I came at it from a really high point in my reading, and this was just boring. I was so bored. Like, I've watched the film since as well, and that was also boring. Like, this is kind of a tepid, lukewarm, blue is the warmest colour. I have read The Talented Mr. Ripley by Patricia Highsmith as well, which obviously is an amazing film, but the book of that even was just bland. There's nothing, this woman needs some seasoning. There's nothing exciting about her writing. There really is not. Like, it's very rare that I'm actually bored for a book, but this was dull. This was really dull. So this is about a 19-year-old girl called Therese who is working in a department store, and she's a strange character because from her point of view, the whole point of her is that she's young and she doesn't really know what she wants, and she doesn't really have any tastes yet, and she doesn't really have anything that she likes to do, and she's kind of just a bland, unshaped, malleable thing. And then she meets Carol, who comes into the department store and is this sort of older woman. I think she's 34, 35, and she's sort of this older, brave, sort of charismatic, sexual woman, and basically she lures Therese in and ends up taking her on a sordid sort of road trip, but Carol is in the process of getting a divorce, and her daughter is taken by the father, and he then files for full custody on the grounds that Carol is a lesbian. This was released in the 1950s, so I had to bear in mind that it was quite scandalous for its time and all the rest of it. You know, it had to be published under a pseudonym, and it was originally published as a pinch of salt. So there was that aspect of it, but generally, even then, I just thought, actually, if it was released in the 1950s, I think the image that it portrayed of lesbianism was more damaging. And it very much portrays lesbianism as a sort of vulturous, insidious thing. Like, it wasn't a healthy relationship. It was kind of a corruptive relationship, like Carol was corrupting this innocent little Therese. But it very much had a kind of Lolita-esque feel. You know how the man, Herbert, in Lolita takes Lolita off for this sordid road trip where they sleep in motels and have sex privately. Like, this was very much like that, and I thought, it's just, yeah, it's a bit of an unhealthy way to portray lesbianism, especially in a time when lesbianism wasn't necessarily known about or spoken about. So there was that aspect that actually really irritated me. And quickly, just going to do a spoiler alert. So I will give a thumbs up when the spoiler's over. Basically, at the end, Therese goes back to Carol, and I really didn't like that, because the whole point is that Carol goes off and stops talking to Therese while they're on their road trip. She sort of just abandons her, and Therese sort of comes into herself and gets to know what she wants and who she is, and she goes back to Carol, and Carol basically says to her, will you live with me, will you be with me? And at first she says no, and she goes off, and you're like, that's fair. And then she goes back and is like, actually, no, I will live with you. And the whole point is that they live happily ever after. Carol was not a good person, so this is not a good ending, because Carol was horrible, and I don't think she would have gone back. End of spoiler. So, yeah, not good. Not good. The more I think about it, the more angry it makes me. I just think it was a bad portrayal. Bad. So, that was everything I read in the month of July. Mainly my reading success was during the Booktubeathon. That really kick-started my month, and if it weren't for that, I think it would have been a shocking reading month. But anyway, so as I say, if you want to check out my Booktubeathon wrap-up, I will link it down below. And I hope everybody else had a good reading month in July. Bye!